Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Becoming Anchored podcast. My name is Laura Deneen. I will be your host for today. Lauren Jackson is not with us, but she is with us in spirit. So welcome to the show today. We have a lovely, exciting guest for you all, Sara Christensen Jeffs. She is amazing. And I really just have loved her content and following her on Instagram. And so I reached out and asked her if she wanted to be on this show today. So welcome, Sara.
Thank you. Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Yeah, I'm super excited just to learn from you and chat with you today. If you're new to the Becoming Anchor podcast, we really are about two things on this show. So first and foremost, Lauren and I are human and we go through hard things. We go through pain and suffering. We also go through joy, and we love to share a little bit more about our personal lives on this show. We also have the wonderful gift of sitting with clients on a day in and day out basis and truly just cherish that work. I was actually just talking to a client today about how sacred the work of therapy is. And so we love to provide some of our insights and maybe nuggets of wisdom that we have gleaned over the years. So if this is your first time listening to the show, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. Quick disclaimer, this is not meant to be your therapy. If you are in the state of Tennessee, we would love to see you. So please reach out to our practice, Anchored Counseling Co. If not, we recommend that you find someone who is in your state or local to you. So Sara, thank you so much for your time today and joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Of course. Yeah. Sara and I were chatting right before the show, and I know that you talk about so many wonderful things on your account. And for the record, we will link her account in the show notes if you all are interested in following Sara. But we really just talked about how to access your innate sense of self-worth, and that being the topic that we really wanted to explore with you all today.
Yeah, I love the whole concept of that. It's something that I feel really passionate about. And I think that right now, especially, we're in December and we're just getting inundated with these messages about almost like an end of year panic, right? Like get a head start on your dream body or crush your goals or, all these things that you need to do to validate yourself or make yourself better in all these different ways. And I think that the quest for growth and personal development is amazing. It's admirable. People want to grow and achieve their goals and their dreams. But I think sometimes along the way, people forget just how much innate worth they have that isn't dependent on what they do or perform or achieve or the goals that they crush or how they look or any of those other things. It's just there within them and it's unconditional. And I just think it's a really important message for us all to remember.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I completely concur and agree. And yeah, absolutely. And I think the messages, especially this time of year and really even into January and, the rest of the year too, they certainly pop up, but they're problematic and they can be harmful because like there's nothing wrong with working hard or having a dream or goal, but we can almost kind of take that and run with it in a problematic way. And that's what I hear you saying right now.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that we just absorb all of these messages. I think that was really one of the reasons why I started my Instagram account in the first place. I started it about over 3 years ago. And it was just thinking of the way that we consume social media. And at the time, both of my kids were teenagers. And a lot of times it's just these micro messages that come through as we scroll. A lot of times it's people's highlight reels, right? And that kind of thing. And we're just absorbing this message of like more. We need to do more, be more, achieve more. And I think that sometimes it can just leave people feeling inadequate or just feeling bad about their own lives. So I kind of started the account thinking, okay, if someone just scrolls through my account and they get this message for 5 seconds to remind them of how far they've come or to remind them that they are enough exactly as they are, that they don't have to do another thing to make them any more worthy, then I just felt like that was really worthwhile, whoever that reached. I think those messages are important for us more than ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a couple things just to highlight from what you shared. The micro messaging feels
Yeah.
important to highlight, just in the sense that I think brands as a whole have gotten really adept, if you will, at sending these messages, and they're kind of cloaked in branding and fancy
Yeah.
verbiage. But at the end of the day, they do, I think, oftentimes lead to us feeling bad about ourselves or not enough. And they're oftentimes cloaked with some layer of shame or defectiveness, which then,
Yes.
I think people can start to feel like, oh, wow, I need to do this thing. And then that's what's going to lead me to experiencing being lovable or enough. So that is interesting that you're talking about that, right? It's like that shame-based messaging that's a little bit more subtle, and it's smart on the part of these brands, but it's also problematic in many different ways.
Yeah. Because I think just this message that people feel like the clients that I work with as a wellness coach, I think sometimes that message of just not enoughness or a message of feeling like they're too much in certain ways and just feeling the pressure to conform to this thing that's out there. I think it's just so important for people to remember like their own unique light and their strengths and their gifts. And a lot of times when I've worked with clients, like the first thing we do is like, tell me what you're doing really well. Tell me what's strong about you. Tell me something in your life that you are the most proud of. Because I think so many times, again, on this quest for improvement, it's just forgetting to like fortify our strengths. And it's so interesting because even the research shows that like if we tap into what's already like inherently good and strong about us, it motivates us to pursue the things that we want for the future. It's like a really good practice to do. So yeah, I think sometimes it's just a message. I think, what do they say? Like you need to hear something. Is it 7 times
I think
before the
so.
message
Yeah.
sinks in? So I thought, okay, like even with the account, if this is just one of the 7 messages to remind someone, oh yeah, like I forgot, I overcame that. And I'm going to just stop for a minute and celebrate it before I make out all of my goals and lists for what I want to do next. And yeah, I think it's just such an important thing to fortify what's already there within us, to celebrate it, to remember it, to celebrate our uniqueness.
Absolutely. Well, and we talk a lot about hope on this show. And
Yeah.
I am a firm believer that that is one way for us to access both our resiliency and hopefulness about the future is looking historically around what we've overcome, what we are proud of. It's that strengths based approach of like, hey, what is going well for me? What are areas in which I'm really gifted? And we are so quick to dismiss those or maybe forget those as human beings. So I love that you were doing that work with clients. Just out of curiosity, what are the answers that people give you when you're asking them like what they're proud of?
Like so many things because I've worked like also one-to-one as a health professional for over 20 years. And like people are amazing in their strength and courage. Like you just look at someone's life, you see a snapshot of it, right? And then you get into conversation with someone and the way that they've overcome this thing that maybe no one even knew was a struggle for them. I say this a lot to people. I truly believe doing the work and going to therapy is incredibly brave. So that's something to celebrate, to actually
Absolutely.
seek help and ask for help and say, I don't want to do this alone. I think the way that people just show up, even amidst the fear and the challenge, the way that the resiliency that people have, I know sometimes that word can get a little bit overused, but the true resiliency that people have to get knocked down, get back up again, they're working on themselves, they're taking brave steps, all of those things. And I think even in this like post-COVID landscape where, our world has changed a lot and it's caused a lot of fear and anxiety for people. And yet people are still like doing the work and showing up. So the most amazing stories I've heard from people of just strength and courage and kindness and compassion. And I love listening to people's stories. Again, even on the account, people will sometimes leave something in the comments of what they did overcome or achieve. And they're just such great things to remember and to celebrate.
Absolutely. And you light up when you're talking about it. So I can tell
Yeah.
that it's really meaningful for you.
Yeah. I think it just to be, if you can remind someone of that, it's like we're just so bombarded with information too, right? We're just in this age of information overload. We have so much coming at us all the time. So again, just remembering what's important and remembering what's already been there is so worthwhile.
I love this. And I already feel a sense of encouragement. We've been talking for about 10 minutes now, and I already feel a sense of encouragement chatting with you. So I know that the work that you're doing with your clients is so meaningful. But really circling back to the topic for this episode, so how to access your innate sense of self-worth.
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, we like to provide working definitions of what we're talking about before we're
Yeah.
even doing this, the how to, right? The practical takeaways, the practical steps. So when you're thinking about the working definition or the concept of self-worth, you've mentioned a few things, right? This unconditional love, this unique light that individuals have. What else would you add to that today?
I think it really starts with just having extra compassion for yourself. And I'm such a big fan of like Dr. Kristen Neff's work around self
Yeah.
compassion. I think it's really transformative work. And I think, especially for people who tend to be really driven, really high achievers, and who maybe just have a really loud inner critic that makes them feel like they have to do more and more to be worthy, to feel validated. I think it really starts with just giving yourself extra kindness. And the whole work and principle behind that is that you give yourself the same kindness and care that you would give to a good friend. And I think a lot of times we find it easier to show kindness and compassion for other people than we do for ourselves. And so, this work of self compassion, I think it's just an integral part of accessing your worth, because you're really just giving yourself space for everything that you're feeling, for every challenge, every difficulty. It's really the opposite of toxic positivity, where you feel like you just have to put on a brave face and keep like soldiering on. It's more about just giving yourself kindness. And especially if you're finding things hard, or you're experiencing difficult feelings, or you're going through a hard time in your life, just stopping for a minute and thinking, okay, seeing yourself and giving yourself some kindness. It's giving yourself a break, I think, noticing how you feel.
Absolutely. Gosh, I love all of this. And I deeply resonate with everything that you're sharing, just as
So
someone who has
glad.
had to work differently. I know I shared this right before we started recording, but really, I've had a couple different seasons in my career as a therapist. And one of those was right after I had my daughter, and we went through just a lot of change, and I needed to shift where I was putting my worth, right? Because
Yes.
historically, I have been someone that put my sense of worth in what I achieve, and it can lead to burnout. It kind of can feel like you're on this hamster wheel that is
Yeah.
never ending, and it's exhausting.
Yes. And
Mm-hmm.
I think life transitions, like becoming a mom, there's so many like times in life where I think that can highlight more in your life, because it's such a change. And we kind of we get to know ourselves, right? Through sense of accomplishment, through what we do and all of those things. And if we're suddenly in a situation where everything's different, it can highlight some of those areas that feel a little scary and uncertain for us. And I think it just starts with, yeah, the kindness of like, it's okay that I feel this way. Dr. Kristen Neff talks about like connecting to our common humanity too, which is just reminding ourselves that even though what we're going through might be a really, really unique struggle and no one else has walked in our shoes, but reminding ourselves like the difficult feelings that we feel with it are so universal, and that other people feel the same way too. And I think that's an important thing, because we can feel so isolated when we're struggling, or we can look around us and it can look like other people just have it together or whatever else. So reminding ourselves that we're not alone in these times, like as a new mom, it's remembering that every other new mom goes through just the same thing. And, it just takes away those feelings of isolation, which I think is so important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's an invitation really to perhaps shift how we're doing things, right? If you are someone
Yeah.
listening today and you resonate with what Sara is sharing around like, oh, wow, maybe I do put too much of my worth in external things, whether that's work or a relationship or job performance or whatever it might be. We don't have to shame that. It's really an invitation to do some of this deeper work around like really getting curious. I guess this is more of the how to, but I wonder, why without the judgment there, but why this is the case for me, right? Like, I wonder what this is about for me, and really looking at this through the lens of curiosity and compassion, I think can be one of the first steps.
Yeah.
Starting to question some of those messages, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, can be part of that process for you too, if you resonate with what Sara and I are talking about today.
Yeah, I love that. And I love you bringing in like the curiosity piece too, because it just kind of silences any tendency to be critical of ourselves or feel like I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I should be over this by now, or I should be further along than I am. I think so many people feel that way. They feel like they're struggling to keep up with all the noise and everything around them. And I think the curiosity kind of it helps to silence all of those things, and it helps us just to get to know ourselves better. And I think that's a part of self-worth too, is the better we know ourselves, the more we can just be kind and loving towards ourselves too. It's just a part of self-love, is self-discovery and understanding ourselves more.
Sure. Well, and circling back to one thing that I wanted to talk about, I think this theme of comparison has come up in today's show, right? And if we think about what gets in the way of accessing our innate self-worth, I do think that that's a piece of the work for a lot of us, is if we find ourselves in patterns of comparison, or even in patterns of, okay, I extend kindness to this friend, but not to myself. That's a similar pattern that's happening. Really exploring that with our own selves, with gentleness and tenderness and compassion, can be really fruitful work as well.
Definitely. Completely agree. I think just being aware that we can all have a tendency to do that. And again, like there's such wonderful things about like social media, the internet, it connects us more. There's so many great things about it, but it does bring in more comparison. We are seeing so many other people's lives more than we ever have before. But again, we're just seeing little snapshots of it. We're not always seeing the internal struggles. I admire like the mental health accounts that do talk about these things more. I think they're so important. Yeah. But I think a lot of times it can just perpetuate that message of people have it together. I'm struggling. I feel alone. And so, I think it's just so important to create that space around us for our struggles and our hardships.
Absolutely. And we rarely see the full picture, I think, with social media. And that's something that I'm consistently talking to my clients about is, give me an example of what you noticed on your friend's timeline or on their account. And sometimes people are honest and vulnerable. And I think we're trending in that direction, and that's wonderful. But a lot of times the pictures that we post or the things that we talk about are more of a curated image versus like you talked about, the reality of what might be happening behind closed doors. And that can be a lot for our brains to digest too, and can lead to the comparison and can, I think, chip away at some of the self-worth that we're talking about today as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too, because, we practice through a trauma-informed lens, right? So this concept of, how to access our innate self-worth, I think we can't, I know this is a double negative, but we can't not talk about developmental trauma as well without getting too much into it, right? But, Sara and I today have talked about, okay, how much are we comparing ourselves to other people? Is there an inner critic going on? Are we extending the same kindness to ourselves that we would extend to other people? How much are we on socials, and how much is that actually a picture of real life versus imaginative life? And there is a piece too, if you struggle with self-worth, we almost have to look at our historical timeline as well. So really looking at, and I'm sure you do this some with your clients as well, but as a child growing up, how were you talked to? Did you have someone that believed in you? Were you loved on? Were you cherished? And those are helpful questions as well, because those formative years matter as well in terms of our ability to access our innate self-worth.
It's so true. I completely agree with that. And I think that, sometimes we go back to move forward, right? I think that's where therapy is such an important piece of that too, to go back and explore those topics. But then also there's so much that we can unlearn. And that's just another part of personal development and moving forward, is the unlearning the messages that maybe we internalize, that when we performed well, that's when we felt more loved. And when we didn't perform so well, that's when we didn't. And it's really by revisiting those stories and those messages, we really truly get to rewrite some of it. And I know that, it's not as simple as that. There's work behind it. But that's the wonderful thing, even about our brains, about the way that our bodies heal, is that when we go back and discover some of that in moving forward, we can realize the ways that wasn't true, and that actually this is the truth of who we are. And this is what we're going to cling on to moving forward.
Yeah, the unlearning, I think, just feels so important to highlight today. Just even the permission to pause and look at our stories and look at where perhaps we needed more from a caregiver or parental figure in that moment, where our needs weren't met, or we were maybe consistently praised for our grades versus the kindness that we extended to others. And the purpose of this conversation is not to shame our parents, but it's more to allow our adult selves to really go back and take care of our younger selves. And I think that can be really fruitful too. And it's interesting too. I've leaned a little bit more into this framework, just even having a daughter and watching her go through some of the experiences recently, and, looking at maybe some of my own stuff that has shown up even as a mom. And so all that to say, I think that can be a really fruitful part of accessing our innate self-worth, is looking at maybe times when we felt missed in our childhood, or when our worthiness wasn't valued or pointed out or appreciated. That can just be really fruitful work to do as well.
It really can. And it's so true what you said about when you become a mom, you're almost confronted with revisiting some of those messages, right? Because now you're an adult and you're looking at this child and you're knowing that how much you love them, and that unconditional love that you feel, and you want them to have that same message. My daughter is 15, almost 16. And, it's the same thing. Just, I want that message to really sink in so deeply that it's great to have ambition and to want all of these things, but none of it changes the essence of who you are. You will always be such a beautiful, lovable person with this innate worth that does not rest on successes or failures or external validation or anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. What a gift she has to have you as a mother and to hear those messages consistently. I think a lot of people have a lot of grief around this, right? Because if, as a therapist or perhaps as a coach, if you're pointing this out to your clients, I know they can almost, my clients at least, who maybe struggled with accessing their innate worth, can almost look at me with a posture of really? Or that's hard for me to, they'll say something like, that's hard for me to believe, Laura, or I was never told that growing up. And I think that can also evoke a grief response for a lot of individuals around, even as we start to look at what gives us a sense of self-worth if they didn't have that growing up. And so there can be a natural grief process as we begin to uncover the layers of our innate self-worth as well.
Yeah. I think that it's so important to, again, just give yourself space for that grief too, because that's where I think the self-compassion comes in. And that's where you're pushing away any toxic positivity, because toxic positivity would say it's in the past, just move on. And that doesn't serve anyone. I think you have to give yourself space for and grieve for maybe the things that you needed as a child that you didn't receive. Like,
Mm.
it's so valid to grieve that and to acknowledge it to yourself. I think that's part of self-love, is to really let yourself feel those very valid feelings instead of telling yourself again how you should feel. It's giving, I think it's just, I think self-compassion is like such an expansive practice. It's just like, I almost imagine it like it just creates this cushion around you where there's room to breathe. There's room to feel everything that you're feeling. You're not
Mm.
trying to put it away. And then it just allows you to process it more healthfully.
Yeah.
And I think with the self-love too, like you were saying, it's as a concept, I think self-love, self-worth, it's almost like we imagine you have to stand in front of a mirror and be like, I'm amazing, like all that kind of thing. I don't think that's how anyone necessarily feels. If they do, that's great. But it's more just like the little steps at a time. You know, it could be the time where you choose to give yourself the care and the rest that you need instead of pushing through something when you know it's going to burn out and exhaust you. Or it could be just making a little pact with yourself that, okay, every day this week, I'm just going to try and say one kind thing to myself that feels true to me, that resonates with me. So you don't, like with affirming words, you don't have to muster up these statements that don't even feel real. It could just be something as simple as, it's okay that I'm feeling this way, and I am going to let myself feel everything I'm feeling. It's just giving yourself like that tenderness.
Mm.
And I think that's a way that you can build that a little bit more, is just like those little tiny steps. It doesn't have to be these great big feelings. It really can be like actionable steps that you think, okay, I'm going to try and weave a little bit more of this into my life.
Absolutely. Isn't that so interesting when, I have certainly done this, so I'll be the first to raise my hand with this, but I learn about a new concept or I feel challenged or encouraged in a way. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to spend 5 hours thinking about my self-worth the next day, which, we don't have to have judgment or shame for that. But I love that you're highlighting this, like encouraging our listeners to start small and
Yeah.
having kindness for themselves, even in those small steps. And
Yeah.
I think that makes it more sustainable and gives us longevity as well, versus even burning out around personal development, like you've talked about, or trying to access our innate self-worth and burning out because we're spending 5 hours a day trying to access our self-worth. So I think that this is just a really important takeaway as well for our listeners.
Yeah, no, I agree so much. I think if you just lean into that intention a little bit, just say, okay, I'm going to try and take a few steps to show myself that I'm going to be kind. I'm going to fortify my self-worth a little bit more. I'm going to maybe just, whatever it may be for you, journal, write it down, share it with a friend, something that's coming to my mind that I forgot, that I overcame, and I'm going to celebrate it, and I'm going to share that win with someone else. It could be as simple as that. And if you're setting it as like an intention and a value, then rather than trying to muster up a feeling that doesn't necessarily feel true, especially if that hasn't been the case for you your whole life, or if you're unpacking trauma from the past or anything, it doesn't even have to necessarily be this overwhelming feeling. It can just be intentions that you set, that you're going to try and weave these practices into your life a little bit more.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, then the goal here too is that it, becomes more habitual. And I think over time too, our once we start doing something that feels good to our nervous systems or feels good to our bodies and hearts and minds and soul, hopefully there will be a desire to pursue that even more.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. This has just been lovely chatting with you. And I feel like I have, definite takeaways too from today's episode.
Oh, I'm so glad. I've loved talking to you too. I think the work that you guys are doing is so great. And they're just such important conversations to have, right? Because it's just quieting the noise for a minute and just reminding people of who they are and how far they've come and all there is to celebrate about what's already within them while they're on this journey of still trying to grow and heal and improve. It's such a great journey to be on. And I think it's brave to want to do the work. I think people who want to develop personally or want to do the work of healing or recognize something in themselves that they want to grow in, that's brave work. But then it's so great to remember too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, if we think about closing with some homework and an affirmation, Sara, would you like to do one or both of those things?
Yeah. So I guess for homework, just like a little takeaway is maybe just like think of one thing that comes to mind that you are just so proud of yourself for. It could be the littlest thing. It could be something that to someone else doesn't even sound like a lot, but you know what it took for you to do that. Just remember it. And if you wanted to take it further, you could write it down, you could journal it, or even share it with someone that, a safe space, someone that you trust, and just celebrate that for a minute. In the midst of all this noise, just celebrate one thing that you've already done, that you've already overcome, that you feel really proud of, or just something about yourself. It could be a strength that you have. So yeah, that would be the little homework. I think that would be really important. And then the other thing, so this affirmation, I just shared it on my social media, but I feel like it's important because, again, like I said, we're in December and we're just surrounded by noise and what I call like end of year panic, right? Like people are even driving crazier. People are rushing. It's just this message of more and more and more. And so the affirmation would be, there is nothing I need to do, perform, achieve, or succeed at to make me any more worthy than I am right here in the moment.
So beautiful. Thank you. Wow. Yeah, I'm going to cherish that and take that with me today. Yeah, what a pleasure speaking with you. I'm just so grateful for your time and really, really appreciate you and your wisdom today. Just out of curiosity, is there anything that you would like to share with our listeners? Any platforms that you're on that you would like to let them know about?
Oh, thank you. It's been great talking with you too. I've loved it. I feel like we could just go on and on about all of these things. Yeah. So my Instagram account is Dear Beautiful Friend. So if you want to check out any of these affirmations or you just want some encouragement in your feed, then feel free to check that out. Another thing is that I have a book of like poetry, prose, and affirmations that's available on Amazon, and that's called Dear Beautiful Friend. A lot of people have said that they've gifted it to friends for the holidays, or if they know that someone's going through a hard time or they're going through a hard time themselves, that might be an encouragement too. And then I also have, just kind of following on from the affirmations, I have a free guide that I've created just to get you started in an affirmation practice, just the power of our words and saying some of the statements every day. And that, maybe we can link that in the notes too. It's also linked in my Instagram account, but it's self-compassion affirmations. It's 3 affirmations a day over 7 days. It talks a little bit about tips for using the practice of affirmations. So that's another just free resource that anyone can download.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, we will absolutely link that in the show notes. Thank you for your time, Sara. And thank you all for being here on the Becoming Anchored show. Take good care.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.